In August of 717 AD, the air over the Bosphorus was heavy with the scent of salt and smoke. The fleet of the Arab Caliphate, over 1,700 ships strong, stood before the walls of Constantinople, confident of victory. They knew how to fight fire. They had water, an entire ocean of it. But from the prows of the Byzantine ships, carved into the shapes of dragon heads, streams of a viscous, dark liquid erupted. A deafening roar, smoke, panic. The substance clung to the wood and instantly burst into flames. Arab sailors did what instinct dictated. They poured water on the fire. And at that moment, the incredible happened. The fire did not extinguish. It exploded with new, furious intensity, spreading across the surface of the sea and cutting off any path of retreat. Their only salvation became the catalyst for their demise. This was not magic. It was technology. But how could it work against all laws of physics? This brings us to the first enigma. How could the Byzantines burn enemy fleets directly on water for 700 years, if water itself should have been their salvation? The answer lies in forgotten chemistry. But there is a second, deeper mystery. What explains the complete loss of a technology that for 7 centuries was the main guarantor of an entire empire's survival? The secret was kept longer than the entire history of the British Empire from its inception to its collapse. The more important the weapon, the more securely it should have been kept. Yet it vanished. We will crack this code by dissecting it into 5 key elements: the genius of its creator, forbidden chemistry, tactics of application, psychological, terror, and an unprecedented system of secrecy. You will understand how each worked and why a failure in just one link led to the collapse of the entire system. The main question of why the technology was lost will receive its shocking answer when we investigate one of history's most tragic betrayals. Technological breakthroughs happen at the peak of power, not in agony. So how did Byzantium, an empire on the verge of complete collapse in the 7th century, caught in the grip of the Arab Caliphate, manage to create a weapon that had no equal? The answer at first glance is simple. A genius emerged. His name was Kallinikos, an architect and chemist from Heliopolis, a Hellenistic scientific center in Syria, which had been captured by the Arabs. He fled to Constantinople with the idea of liquid fire. But this was not a story of a savior arriving in a thriving capital. In 673 AD, the Caliphate's giant fleet was already blockading the city. It was a matter of survival. Kallinikos offered the emperor not a blueprint, but a miracle. And this miracle had to work on the first try. Its initial deployment was not just a demonstration, but the birth of a legend that would change the rules of naval warfare forever. What was it like in action? When the Arab fleet launched its decisive assault, several Byzantine ships sailed out to meet them. The enemy was ready for arrows, stones, even ordinary fire that could be extinguished. Their tactics, based on numerical superiority and boarding, had always worked. They saw the dark liquid pouring from the dragon heads on the prows of the Byzantine vessels and prepared to put it out. But this liquid exploded, with flames directly on the water. Chronicles describe total shock. Their tactical plan didn't just fail, it turned against them. The vanguard of victory transformed into burning traps. It was as if gravity had suddenly started working upwards. All naval tactics were built on one law of nature: water extinguishes fire. The Byzantines forced this law to work against the enemy. The battle was won, but the emperor understood. This weapon was too powerful for its secret to be known to anyone else. How could water, the universal extinguisher, intensify combustion? This question plagued Byzantium's enemies for centuries. The first layer of explanation lies in the theory of quicklime. Upon contact with water, calcium oxide reacts violently, heating it to 150 degrees Celsius in seconds. This heat is enough to ignite petroleum. It seems the mystery is solved. But the reality was more complex. Eyewitnesses described not just fire, but a sticky, thick mass that was impossible to dislodge from the ship's hull. Quicklime alone doesn't explain the viscosity, the stable burning, or the pressure with which the mixture shot out of the siphon. It was a complex composite system. The secret lay in the precise proportions of petroleum, resin for viscosity, and other components unknown to us. This was not merely a chemical substance, it was an engineered product. However, even a brilliant invention could remain a one-time wonder. 40 years later, in 717 AD, the Caliphate returned with an even more gigantic fleet. The threat was exponentially greater, and all of Europe was at stake. The mere presence of the weapon was not enough. And here, Emperor Leo III, the Isaurian, a former soldier from Syria who understood war as a brutal reality, enters the scene. He didn't just use the fire, he integrated it into the fleet's tactics, created special siphon-bearing ships, siphonophoroi, and transformed the weapon from a miracle into a systemic element of defense. In the decisive battle of 718 AD, he once again saved the empire. The inventor's genius, multiplied by the strategist's will, proved invincible. This victory made the fire's recipe the most coveted secret in the world, and attempts to uncover it began immediately. Why can't modern chemists, armed with mass spectrometers, recreate what engineers did in the 7th century in copper cauldrons? This paradox seems inexplicable. The first layer of investigation leads us to the school version of the recipe: crude oil, sulfur, and saltpeter. This mixture does indeed burn, and very well. Most popular articles stop at this simple and logical explanation, creating the illusion that the mystery has been solved. But facts refute this theory. Ignite this mixture and pour water on it, it will extinguish. Try to make it stick to wet wood, it won't work. Try to generate pressure with it for propulsion, it's extremely dangerous and inefficient. This simple mixture fails the test on 3 key parameters. We are looking for the wrong recipe. The real reason lay in a component that completely changed the rules of the game, turning water from a friend into an enemy. Logic leads us to one main suspect in our chemical detective story: quicklime. This substance was well known in antiquity. Upon contact with water, it initiates a powerful exothermic reaction, releasing an enormous amount of heat. Add it to a mixture with petroleum, and splashes of water will turn into a detonator. This theory elegantly solves the main paradox of Greek fire, but it completely ignores the second part of the miracle, the engineering aspect. Eyewitnesses describe not just fire, but a powerful stream roaring out of the siphon for dozens of meters. Where did the pressure come from? The reaction of quicklime with water does not create it. Imagine trying to shout by simply exhaling air. Combustion from quicklime provides heat, but not pressure. For a roaring shot, pressure had to be created in the lungs inside the mechanism. The secret was not in what was mixed, but in how it was done. And this engineering solution was so dangerous that every Byzantine ship was, in essence, a floating bomb. How could the Byzantines create enough pressure for a flamethrower on a wooden ship without steam engines? Military treatises explain it simply. The mixture was heated in a sealed bronze cauldron. The heated liquid and its vapors created pressure, which was then forced out in a stream using a hand pump. This is similar to the principle of a primitive steam engine. But imagine a sealed cauldron, full of a flammable, volatile mixture, being heated over an open flame on board a wooden ship. The slightest leak, a micro crack in the metal, an operator error, and the whole thing turns into a gigantic bomb. The genius of the Byzantines was not only in chemistry, but also in metallurgy and the highest discipline of calculations. They created a system that operated on the verge of explosion. The pressure in the cauldron could reach several atmospheres. This is comparable to the pressure in modern car tires, but at hundreds of degrees Celsius and with a flammable mixture inside. Even if the enemy stole the recipe, they couldn't apply it. But what if there were several recipes? So, what was the final recipe? We don't have a precise answer. And this, perhaps, is the most important part of the mystery. The most logical assumption: it was a multi-component system, not one recipe, but an entire technological platform. The base, crude oil; the catalyst, quicklime; the thickener, pine resin. It was more like cooking than simple chemistry. Different sources describe different types of fire, one shot from a siphon, another thrown in clay grenades. This proves that the recipe changed and adapted over 700 years. It was like a chef's knife, the same tool, but used differently for different tasks. The true formula is lost forever, a testament to the effectiveness of the Byzantine system of secrecy. But if we can only reconstruct the chemistry, we know the tactics of applying this weapon in detail. The chemical secret is lost, but the military secret of its application is revealed. How could a single weapon, even the most powerful, systematically decide the outcome of a battle against a numerically superior enemy? Legends create the image of an absolute weapon, but the reality was more cunning. At first glance, the tactic seems simple: sail up and burn. In the decisive battle of 718 AD, the Byzantine fleet sailed out and annihilated the Arab armada. This appears to be a demonstration of total technological superiority. But here's what the sources conceal. Greek fire had serious limitations. The range of a siphon shot was only 20 to 30 meters. That's less than the length of a modern Olympic swimming pool. Reloading the cauldron was long and dangerous. In open water against a fast opponent, a fire-bearing ship was vulnerable. The Byzantines never engaged in battle under unfavorable conditions. They used their knowledge of currents and narrow straits, such as the Bosphorus, to trap the enemy. There, in close quarters, a few ships could create an inferno. It was a tactic not of annihilation, but of creating chaos. But was it effective against an enemy with different tactics? The next threat came from the north. In 941 AD, the Rus' fleet of Kievan Prince Igor used an entirely different strategy. Instead of large ships, they brought over 1,000 small, maneuverable monoxella dugout canoes. Their plan was to overwhelm the Byzantines with sheer numbers, swarm them, and board. Against such tactics, a pinpoint weapon like the siphon seemed ineffective. It was impossible to burn them all. But when Igor's fleet entered the Bosphorus, the Byzantines deployed the fire. The flames, spreading across the water, created continuous fiery barriers. For small wooden boats, this was even more deadly than for large ships. The swarm tactic failed, turning into a mass self-immolation. This defeat discouraged the Rus from attacking Constantinople by sea for a long time. But the siphon was not the only way to deploy the fire. There was an entire arsenal of smaller versions of this weapon. Military treatises describe handheld chirosophones, prototypes of modern flamethrowers, which infantry used to defend walls or in boarding combat. The Byzantines also hurled clay grenades filled with the incendiary mixture using catapults. This completely changes the picture. The ship-mounted siphon was a strategic deterrent weapon, like a volcanic eruption, rare but devastating. Grenades and handheld flamethrowers were tactical battlefield weapons, like the constant smoldering fire of a forest blaze. Greek fire was not one device, but an entire technological platform adapted for different needs. But this versatility had a downside. Its main effect wasn't even physical destruction. Was this weapon absolute? Its main power lay in defense. It made Byzantium virtually impregnable, the queen of naval defense, turning the Bosphorus into a river of fire. However, in offensive operations or when attacking well-fortified enemy harbors, its effectiveness sharply declined. Bringing a heavy and slow fire-bearing ship under the fire of shore-based catapults was suicidal. Two key limitations: short range and vulnerability in attack. This fundamental limitation defined the empire's entire military strategy for centuries, a strategy of reaction, not initiative. This reliance on a single, albeit brilliant defensive instrument ultimately played a cruel trick. But its main effect wasn't even the destruction of ships, it was in the minds of the enemies. Why did Byzantine engineers spend precious bronze, worth the annual salary of dozens of soldiers, to make siphon nozzles in the form of dragon and lion heads? A simple pipe would have worked just as well. At first glance, this seems like mere ornamentation, a desire to display imperial power. But when we combine this fact with eyewitness accounts, the picture changes. They speak not just of a stream of fire, but of a deafening roar emitted by the siphon. Imagine the scene. From the maw of a roaring bronze monster, a column of flame erupts with a thunderous sound. This was the first weapon in history where the psychological effect was not a byproduct, but a key, consciously designed element. Aesthetics became function. The Byzantines fought not with fire, but with fear, directed at all senses. What exactly did their enemies feel? The crusader Jean de Joinville wrote, "It was like a dragon flying through the sky. The noise it made was like thunder, and there was so much light that the camp was as bright as day." Opponents described it not as a weapon, but as a demonic phenomenon, artificial lightning. It was a total sensory attack. Sight, blinding flame burning on water. Sound, the deafening roar of the mechanism. Smell, thick, poisonous smoke with a pungent sulfuric odor. Touch, a sticky mass impossible to shake off the skin. Enemy sailors encountered something that violated all the laws of their world. In their superstitious minds, it could only be a manifestation of diabolical power. This caused panic, making them jump into the water, where they continued to burn. The Byzantines knew how to amplify this effect. turning battle into a theater of terror. The most effective tactic was night attacks. Dark water, silence. And suddenly, this silence was torn apart by a roar, and the darkness pierced by columns of fire, reflecting off the water and sky. This transformed the weapon into an apocalyptic vision. Sources also hint at chemical additives that gave the smoke a toxic yellow or dense black color, or created a particularly repulsive smell. Their goal was not flammability, but demoralization. It worked like a lightning strike in a night forest. It not only burns a single tree, but also, with its deafening thunder and blinding flash, paralyzes all living things in the vicinity with fear. Often the mere sight of the dragon's breath was enough to send an enemy fleet fleeing. What would frighten you more, the fire itself, which cannot be extinguished, or the deafening roar of a bronze dragon spewing that flame? Both answers point to the weapon's main power. The first, fear of violating the laws of nature, an attack on the rational mind. The second, instinctive fear of a monster, an attack on the animal subconscious. Greek fire struck at both levels of the psyche simultaneously, causing total paralysis of will. It was this all-consuming terror that made its secret the most coveted target for spies. To acquire it meant gaining power based on fear. Therefore, Byzantium created a system to protect the secret, no less ingenious than the weapon itself. It lasted 700 years, but within its perfection lay a bomb that ultimately led to the complete loss of the technology. How could a military technology remain secret for 700 years in a world without intelligence agencies, safes, or encryption? This time frame defies all modern logic. The secret of the atomic bomb lasted less than 4 years. Stealth technology became known to the world in less than 20. Byzantium's secret lasted 35 times longer. At first glance, the answer is obvious: brutality. Disclosure of the secret was punishable by death and considered the gravest act of treason. But fear alone is not enough. The reality was that the secret was guarded not by a wall of silence, but by an ingenious system, a labyrinth of divided knowledge where no single person possessed the entire map. This system worked like human vision. One eye sees a flat image, the other also, but with an offset. Only the brain connects them into a single three-dimensional image. Here, the emperor was the brain. Some families of hereditary craftsmen supplied saltpeter, others refined oil, still others cast bronze siphons. Each knew only their narrow stage and had no idea of the complete picture. Even if the enemy captured the entire staff of one workshop, they would only obtain one useless puzzle piece. The full recipe and assembly technology existed only in the minds of the emperor himself, and possibly one or two families of engineers who passed down the knowledge through inheritance. The entire naval power of the empire, capable of burning a fleet of thousands of ships, depended on the health and loyalty of a group of people who could fit into a single fishing boat. That is why captured weapons did not work. In the 9th century, the Bulgarian Tsar Simeon captured 36 Byzantine siphons along with supplies of the mixture. He was confident that he now possessed the secret. But the Bulgarians were never able to reproduce the technology or effectively apply it. They captured iron and liquid, but they did not capture the know-how. The secret lay in subtleties that cannot be written down: the correct pump pressure, the precise heating temperature of the cauldron. The operator's skills passed from master to apprentice. Greek fire was not a technology, but a living tradition. It's like giving a savage a Kalashnikov. He might use it as a club, but he won't be able to shoot, reload, or repair it. This was the final, tragic paradox. The system that flawlessly protected the secret from spies for 700 years made it absolutely defenseless against historical catastrophe. It was designed to protect against targeted theft, but was utterly unprepared for chaos. There were no backups, no encrypted manuscripts, no backup teams of engineers in other cities. The entire system hung by a thin thread of continuity. It was a lock that couldn't be broken, but crumbled to dust from a single strong blow to the wall it hung on. The system was ready for betrayal, but found itself defenseless against a catastrophe that would simultaneously destroy both the bearers of the secret and the production base. And that blow was already close when ships arrived in the harbor of Constantinople. Not enemies, but allies. How could a technology that survived hundreds of battles simply evaporate? At first glance, the answer seems logical. By the 13th century, the empire was slowly fading, caught in the grip of internal strife and economic crisis. It seems that the technology simply degraded along with it. But the fatal blow did not come from where it was expected. In 1204, the army of the Fourth Crusade, instead of fighting the enemies of Christianity, plundered Constantinople. The city, which had been the shield of Europe for 700 years, was destroyed by its own co-religionists. This was not just a battle, but a cultural catastrophe. The chronicler Nicetas Choniates wrote of air black with smoke from burning libraries and smelling of blood. The 700-year chain of knowledge transmission was on the verge of breaking. In that 3-day chaos, the bearers of the secret, one or two families of engineers, found themselves at the epicenter of the massacre. They were killed in their homes or perished in the fires that engulfed entire quarters. But the reality was even more terrifying. Simultaneously with the loss of human lives, the Venetians, Byzantium's main naval rivals, systematically destroyed the admiralty, arsenals, and docks. This was not just looting, but industrial sabotage on a planetary scale. Imagine you have a unique recipe, written on two halves of a sheet of paper. One is the human carriers, the other is the infrastructure. In 1204, both halves were thrown into the fire simultaneously. It's like trying to start a bonfire. The people were the spark, the infrastructure, the dry fuel. The Crusaders simultaneously doused the spark with water and scattered all the fuel to the wind. But why did surviving military treatises not help restore the technology? Surely records must have remained. Yes, mentions of the fire survived in dozens of sources, for example, in Emperor Leo VI's treatise, Tactica. But all these descriptions were deliberately vague. Gather what shines brightly and mix with the sap of an evergreen tree. Without an oral key, passed from master to apprentice, these texts became meaningless alchemical riddles. The knowledge died because it was living. It's like trying to learn to play a Stradivarius violin with only an enthusiastic description of its sound but no notes and no teacher. Even today, no laboratory in the world has been able to create a composition that perfectly replicates all three properties of Greek fire. Herein lies the final, most bitter irony. The weapon, created as Constantinople's main shield, proved powerless against the betrayal of allies. But the most shocking fact is that when the Byzantines reclaimed the city 57 years later, they were unable to restore production. By the time of the final siege in 1453, when the Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, brought gigantic cannons to the city walls, Greek fire was for the Byzantines themselves no longer a weapon, but a glorious legend from the past. The secret was locked in such a perfect safe that when the key was lost, the safe became impossible to open even for its owners. The technology, protected from all enemies, ultimately protected itself to the point of complete disappearance. Technology or fear? Write one word in the comments and see which force, in the opinion of the majority, was the main one. So what was it in the end? The main mistake in trying to understand Greek fire is searching for a single secret, a single recipe. In reality, it was a system of three inseparable parts, and the failure of any one of them rendered the weapon useless. The first pillar, forbidden chemistry, the paradox of burning on water, based on petroleum and unknown catalysts. This was the foundation, but it was useless on its own. The second pillar, an engineering marvel. Bronze siphons operating on the verge of explosion transformed a dangerous liquid into a controlled stream of fire. This was the mechanism that gave chemistry direction and purpose. And the third decisive pillar, psychological terror. The deafening roar, thick smoke, and the sight of fire erupting from a dragon's maw were not a side effect, but the main weapon. They broke the enemy's will before the fire even touched their ship. Only the unity of these three forces, chemistry, engineering, and fear, created Greek fire. The tragedy of this weapon teaches that any system, pushed to an extreme, generates its own vulnerability. Byzantium's system of secrecy was ingenious. 700 years of success, it was the pinnacle of analog cryptography, based on divided knowledge and hereditary transmission. But it was this very genius that became its Achilles heel. The system lacked redundancy, backups, or self-healing mechanisms. It resembled a species perfectly adapted to a single habitat. As long as conditions are stable, it dominates. But the slightest climate change, and it's the first to die out because it lacks resilience. Greek fire perished not because its secret was stolen, but because it was too well protected. It is a timeless reminder. Isolation and lack of reserves make any knowledge mortal, and what knowledge in our lives relies on one or two people and risks disappearing with them. This story is not just a historical curiosity, but a metaphor for the fragility of human knowledge. It is a powerful warning for our civilization. We face the same risks today. According to UNESCO estimates, over 50% of all digital heritage created before 2000 has already been irrevocably lost due to media degradation and format obsolescence. We are already living in our own digital dark age. Every day, languages disappear, dying with their last native speaker. Unique crafts and skills that cannot be digitized vanish with their masters. Progress is not a one-way street. Regression and the loss of knowledge are always possible. What Greek fires do we risk losing today? We have seen how technology was created and lost. But in the end, the main question remains, what was its true power? At the end of this investigation, one main question remains, to which there is no unambiguous answer. What was the true, decisive force of Greek fire? If you believe it was all about unique technology, in the secret recipe that burned on water, and in the ingenious siphons that delivered it, write one word in the comments: technology. But if you are convinced that the main weapon was not the mixture itself, but the psychological terror it evoked, the dragon's roar, the unquenchable flame, the panic that made entire fleets flee without a fight, write the word fear. So, what decided the fate of the empire for 700 years?